the first track is kind of a soundscape, and I was wondering, um, so you've got some samples from your EP, and I wanted to find out if the soundscape was a just a one take, and then how you chose your samples from Tim Gardner.
Sure. Yeah. Um, I think there's kind of a common approach to some of the soundscape pieces where um, the initial soundscape was recorded in one session, and then when I use it on this album, I layered on some other things after it. So in this one, the bass soundscape is actually a 5 or 6 minute soundscape that was all recorded in one session, and then I added really some textures to it, and the snippets from the songs from Time Gardeners, and then it sort of isn't. Its purpose is to be kind of a reflection on the past, to have little pieces of things from the past, and then kind of really quickly build into the first piece of the album. The sample selection is thinking about it, it was pretty random. I there were certain sections, maybe in a couple pieces, that I wanted to try, and then I just kind of experimented with different snippets. So some of them are reversed, some of them are way in the background, some of them are a little bit more prominent. But it was probably trial and error, or a random selection that I liked after I tried it the first time.
And those uh, was there a lot of kind of mixing involved, and obviously in the mixing stage to kind of put them and this is the stereo field, but also maybe in the piece itself, or you're just like, this is where I want to have them, and you can mix that.
Yeah, I'd say I did a lot of that sort of pre-mixing myself, and then I think Fabio had some, creative input in like the balance of the different
Yeah.
components. Yeah, but a lot of what you hear, I think, is kind of how I selected them to where they would be, and general how prominent they would be.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And as you said, most of the soundscapes are, if not all of the soundscapes that are on this album, are one take, and then you kind of it picked, I guess, the parts that would fit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's usually there's a bass kind of hardware looped soundscape to all the
Mhm.
soundscape pieces. That is one take, and then when I say it's recorded in one session, I usually circle back and add 2 or 3 other tracks in that same session. So over the course of
Right.
like an hour or so, I'll put the piece together. But the majority of the sounds are on that one track with hardware loopers. I think that might be an example we could look at a little bit later.
A little bit later. Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
So you've got that first little short improvised solo, and then we get into track 2, which is starts kind of like right away into the album and gives a good idea of what the vibe is going to be. There's a lot going on in that piece. I really love the break
Oh, nice.
with those chords. It just works so nice. And are those guitar chords, or is that on the touch guitar?
I think it's both. There's maybe 4 or 5 tracks of guitars and touch guitars kind of making that up altogether. Yeah, interestingly, like, if you listen to this CD and the other one, you'll hear like a lot of distorted guitar in solos and for effect, but not a lot of distorted chords like that.
Right.
And part of the reason is I struggle to get a sound that I really like with that. I do, like, when I'm playing, I tend to mix in a lot more heavier things than you hear on the CDs. So it actually, even though there's not a lot going on there with the chords, it took me a lot of time to get something that I liked, and then Fabio took that much further. But yeah, it's definitely kind of a combination of touch guitars and guitars there.
Yeah, and the drums that Juan played, the drum fill is just it's great. I like again that whole section there in the middle, and it really puts the two the beginning and the end of the piece really well together, and it flows really nicely. Um, the Obviously there's also some soundscapes on that piece, I believe. And I guess you kind of explain or answered the question of if it's improvised, written, or a composite of both.
Yeah, this one I think there's some Ebo tracks in there that are kind of in the background, that may sound a little soundscapey, but those are uh, those are improvised as well, but they're mainly like a single track of Ebo. I don't recall if there's any other soundscapes in this piece, but that may be the
Mm.
thing that sounds most like that.
I mean, you do have some solos also, and as you
Yeah,
mentioned, it's kind of interesting because I was going to ask you that a lot of your solos are mixed lower. Um,
yeah,
they're not like, oh, here's the solo, here's the 70s and
yeah,
full solo, or the 80s was the Eddie Van Halen's and all of that. But and again, your solos are not necessarily like a lead vocal. They're probably more for
yeah,
ambience.
yeah.
Um, but it's very interesting. You have that approach on all of the pieces. So that's something you must really enjoy doing.
Yeah, I think part of it is my personality. I think even back when I was playing in bands and playing lead parts, I tended to like to sit further back in the mix. But here, there's so much stuff blended together. I kind of like that approach where it isn't like nothing. There's no vocalist that stands out in front of everything else, and
Right.
you really want that with any of the parts. Yeah, and I think Fabio, fit right in with that, with kind of, seeing that in the vision and carrying that forward too.
Yeah, and you do a lot of this with your you've got a pretty big effects board for your
Yeah,
guitar, and you just kind of get all your tone and ideas through that, right?
yeah. I think the bass, the basic kind of sounds like clean guitar bass. Usually those are relatively clean, but
Hmm.
everything else where I'm just kind of experimenting with textures and sounds is usually off the board, and then there'll be some additional things kind of added in the mix that just like traditional reverb and
Right.
delay. Yeah, really the same with the lead parts. That I think we talked before. I think I'm breaking some rules there, but I'll usually even have some reverb and delay and in coming off the board in the lead parts, and then maybe a little bit would be added in the mix. But yeah, a lot of it is there.
Yeah, so a lot of the delays and stuff like that, that's already pre-planned. It's not like you've got a solo or soundscape, and then in the mix later on, you're like, okay, let's add some, I don't know, some depth or whatever it is, or thickness to the sound.
A little bit of both. There'll be
A bit of both.
some that's sort of part of the sound that I wanted to keep that was there, and then some things are added for depth as well later in the mix.
Okay. Let's move on to the third one, which is called Solitude. Trying to remember if this is one where yeah, you've got Mark as a co-writer,
Yeah.
co-conspirator. uh, what how did it work with Mark? One of the things you have in the booklet, it says early drum programming.
Yeah, this is one of the pieces that Mark and I collaborated on pretty early. I think I had the seed of the idea for this one that I sent him, and he programmed drums for the whole piece, which were really cool actually, and keyboard parts for it, and really the keyboard parts really kind of form the vibe of the piece. It's got kind of an interesting mix of inspirations in there. So you know, I really like Mark's drums, but when I started going in the direction of having all drums,
Right.
that we wanted to sound like acoustic drums, played by Juan ended up replacing those drums. So that was the case for a few pieces. Mark had kind of programmed drums on this piece and Recoil, which those are the glitchy drums that are still on it, and
Right.
212 was another one that Mark had programmed the drums on. Yeah, I think I really liked what he did. It's just a different vibe completely. I think if I do some sort of a remix with some of the pieces on this album, I think that's one that I'd like to try to use.
Okay. And so there are some pieces where Juan had basically took the drum programming and played the acoustic. There's also a lot of I guess djembe sounds and percussion on there. Is that again Juan, or is that programmed stuff? Or
Yeah, with this piece, I think there's kind of a vibe to the the A section in the piece and how the drums that Mark programmed felt, and I think Juan used that as an inspiration, and then he kind of took it in his own direction as well, including all of the percussion. So really the choice of all the percussion and those percussion tracks are all Juan's input.
this is all live
Yeah.
live stuff? Oh.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's all acoustic. None of the
Yeah,
programs.
very nice. I mean, there's a lot of obviously he's playing the drums, but there's a lot of percussion all over the album that are really nicely thought through, and just like that those little cherries on the cake.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very cool. And then you mentioned Recoil, which is the next track, and that one also has Mark on there doing all the glitchy FX twin kind of stuff. Do you know what came first? Was it
on
his
that
glitch,
piece?
or yeah?
Yeah, I think that was another one where the seed of the song was something that I sent Mark, and then he started adding to it. So I think there are some layers of bass and guitar and touch guitar in the first section of the piece that came first, and then Mark started adding those drums, and really gave me this. All of them were cool. It gave me a whole variety of different versions of it, and ended up taking kind of large sections from a couple different versions of it. Yeah. So that was one where I gave him the seed of an idea, and then he came back with those really cool glitchy drums, and then I kind of added to it, and the piece kind of evolved from there, from those two inputs.
Bouncing ideas between the two of you.
Yeah.
And was there? I always ask that question. Any tricks with the mix? Any kind of delays and morphing put into mainly into the glitchy drums or anything like that? Because there's a lot of sounds that I'm just curious if it was like first take hunting, or just like, we should add this, or ideas maybe from obviously from Fabio, the mixing engineer.
Yeah, maybe I can show you sort of the pre-mix version of this, which would be close to the tracks that I sent Fabio, but surprisingly not a ton of tricks in the mix from that point forward. I do, if you listen through the album, I do like to use as part of the texture in places reverse guitar, so you'll hear some of that in this piece. So those are things that I kind of put together in separate tracks there, and I did a little bit of reversing and kind of chopping up some of the drums in a second track, but largely in this piece there's a single drum track that has what Mark did for programmed drums, and all of the glitching that he did. mixed down to one track, and that was the input into the final mix for the song. So yeah, I can share that real quick if you want to see, but it's all there in that track, and it's really Fabio kind of mixing the whole piece from that point forward.
Yeah, you should have access to sharing your screen.
Ooh, let me do that.
If you don't, you let me know.
See if this works.
Yeah.
Let's see. Can you see the live set? Or?
Yeah. Ableton, yeah.
And I'm gonna make sure. So this, if we look at one of the other major pieces, you'll see there's a lot more tracks in some of these songs. This is actually one that has a surprisingly small number of tracks in it. But the orange tracks here are drums. And Mark's drums, with all the glitching, were sort of already mixed down in this one track coming from Mark. And then I did a little bit of some sort of tricks and effects with reversing some pieces of it in a couple of sections. And there's a little bit of programmed acoustic style drums towards the end of the piece. And this is one of those pieces that just different layers kind of come in and build up, similar to the second song on the album.
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is sort of the pre-mix project where each track is exported and sent to Fabio for final mix. But this is the drum track.
The drum kit.
And I can show you some of the layers here. That's the basic guitar sound. A couple tracks of bass. The climbing guitar. Here's an example of a reverse sound that I use for texture.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so largely you can hear the drums are pretty close to the final mix there.
Yeah. Very nice. And then you've got that little the top orange track that is coming up with a little something, right?
Yeah. You put those two together. A little bit of sort of reverse and hacking up some of the drums.
Yeah. Very subtle. Nicely done. That distorted bass is this first time I hear it, so I guess it's much lower in the mix on the album. It's nice.
Oh, the bass. Yeah, there's a couple of tracks in this piece. There's kind of a blend of a bass and an octave down version of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really nice. The next one is there's a few weird things. It's called 212 or 212 degrees. You explained during the listening party that it was the boiling temperature of water in Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And there is right at the beginning a piano hit in the intro. Is that also Mark, or is that something from the touch guitar that just sounds like a piano hit? Or
yeah, that was something that I added. The intro section of the piece is kind of a later addition to the song, and some of these pieces pretty early on I had an idea of how I wanted them, the order that I wanted them in, and some of the transitions between them. This one for quite a while was planned to go after Recoil, and at the end of that piece it starts to kind of fade out where you're you're listening a little bit more intently to hear things that are getting quieter and quieter, and then the piano hit was there to kind of shock you into the into the next piece. But it's a bunch of tracks, so there's a big piano chord with I don't know, 10 or 12 notes in it, and then there's a bunch of U8 tracks that are also playing notes in the chord all at one time.
And there's a lot of drum and percussion again in that one.
Yeah.
How much did that influence the composition, or did Juan get kind of your final thing and then he I'm always like very curious if he just figured it out on the fly or if he had some written parts that he kind of went through or
Yeah, so this piece, this is another one that started with a collaboration with Mark and I, and I think the seed for this one came from Mark. I think he mentioned it in the listening party, but it was something that he started with. It was in 21. It was like these three groups of seven. So I think it actually started with drums that he programmed, and then I added the A and the B sections over that, and some back and forth there. And I think he added some of the keyboards after that, so we kind of bounced it back and forth. It took me a while to kind of build out the C section and the intro. But by the time I handed the piece off to Juan, I think like the other pieces like Solitude, where there was a drum track to refer to, probably part of that inspired some of the things that Juan did initially. And then he took this one in quite a different direction as well. The B section of this piece, I really love what he did. And then Fabio gave it like a really incredible amount of space. So there's some really cool percussion stuff going in kind of an odd time signature. And there's a lot of space in there. So Juan added a ton to this one, really cool percussion. And then as I kind of finished out the piece, I took what he did and reacted to it. So a lot of what you hear in the C section is kind of, a mostly arranged piece was given to Juan, and then he added his stuff and then kind of circled back and finishing out the piece reacted to some of the things that he put on there. So a little bit of back and forth on this one. But
back and forth.
Generally, he got some pretty complete pieces and came up with great stuff for them. The longest piece on the album was one where he had like zero reference. He just got this mostly arranged piece with no drums and came up with some really cool stuff for it.
Nice. And I heard something in this track around the 1 minute. Is there a phone ring?
Yeah, I think you asked me that question, and I actually had to go back to the tracks and and what's interesting is I think it's this sort of accidental harmonic on a guitar, but
oh, really?
It's on a guitar track, and none of the guitar tracks in this piece were recorded. I think they're all sort of direct. So it's at first I know Juan did so many percussion tracks in some of these pieces, and this is one of them. And some of them, I think there's triangle on at least one of the pieces. So I thought that might be what you're hearing there, but it's actually
maybe
it's on a guitar track, and I don't think it's a phone. But good question. I like the effect, but I think it was accidental.
I'm asking because I there was a piece where in the mixing stage towards the end of it, I'm like, there's a phone ringing right there. And so I told the mixing engineer for my album, I told him, man, there's a phone ringing. And I knew right away pretty much the only thing that was really direct was the touch guitar, so everything was acoustic. But the pianist did some sound effects through the piano, was just playing the strings and singing in the piano and stuff like that. and I found that her phone had rang during one of the takes.
Oh wow.
And I actually used that take, and I didn't even realize the phone wasn't there. So I don't know how he did it, but the phone is no longer there.
Oh wow. Wow.
So that was pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that
So I'm like, yeah,
really the vast majority of the guitar and touch guitar tracks are direct. I think there's one piece, Mercury, where I recorded some of the clean tracks with a mic. But so had this been that song, I would have wondered if I picked something up on the mic. But on this piece, I don't think anything was recorded with the mic other than that percussion and drums.
So the next track is one of those little soundscape interlude. I shouldn't say little because it's over 3 minutes long. And we kind of touched on that before, but are those soundscape interlude done on purpose, first of all? And was it an afterthought, or did you already have kind of that idea in mind for your album?
Yeah, I pretty early on I had the idea of interspersing some of that stuff because I wanted to kind of bring together the two styles of music that I've been releasing albums in. But for a soundscape piece that I use in this album, I wanted to sort of add more to it than just a pure soundscape. So pretty early decision there, and this is, I think, the first one that I included as well. Yeah.
Yeah. They work really, really great. And I'm assuming all of them, they kind of have, maybe you added some solos and stuff like that, a few overdubs.
Yeah, this is one I could show you real quick.
Sure.
I'll take a look. But so you can see if I share one more piece with you that I want to show you, there it's dramatically different from these two, but this one is even simpler than the last one you looked at. There's only 5 or 6 tracks on it, or 7 tracks on it. So that very first track is the sort of core hardware looped soundscape track. I can play this a little bit of it so you can get a sense for what kind of thing I typically capture first with hardware loopers. So there's a lot going on in it, but that's kind of the core. And then in the same recording session, I would have added these other 2 tracks so you can hear more of textures in those. And then on this piece, I think there is this track that has the Chase Bliss Habit on it that would have been part of that discussion as well. Also another texture in the background. So those 4 would have been recorded in that first session, with the bass being that first track.
Right.
And then what I added to this to kind of use it on the album are the tracks of distorted guitar here. So there's one that has this kind of sequenced effect on it. So you can hear a lot of effects on this one already. Fabio did some really cool things with this track to really bring that effect out. But that's actually a reverb pedal I have that lets you sequence the reverb, and each step in the sequence is a different reverb sound. So it's like a distorted guitar through that sequenced reverb, still in a pedal. And then there's a fuzz guitar kind of solo towards the end of the middle of these. So that's just that one track with that distorted guitar. A lot of effects on it.
It has some effects, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the approach on that one. And that distorted fuzz, I think Fabio did another really cool thing with it, where it's already got that kind of crackly, breaking up, gated fuzz sound, but at the end of the piece, it really sounds almost like lightning or electricity crackling, which really fits kind of perfectly with the idea of the piece. So
That's
really
what I
neat.
heard. Yeah, last time when we were listening to it. Yeah, hey, very nice. I like those. Kind of showing the under the hood, basically what's going on. It's very nice. Um, the next one is the longest piece, and I know Juan has a writing note on it, co-writer. Um, so I had a question. What parts of guitar, what parts of touch guitar? You told me you're not quite sure anymore. So we'll probably pass on that. But I was just curious. So since Juan is as the co-writer on it, what was the process like? What was his role, or if any, or again, was it kind of a back and forth, kind of like with Mark?
Uh, yeah, I think, like I mentioned, this one, it's a long piece, and I never had. It's a piece I sort of tried on multiple occasions with the early ideas for it um, to do different things with the drums. I tried to program some. I gave them to a couple of folks that didn't go very far in collaborating. So I didn't have any drums for this one, but it was like a 8, 9, 10 minute piece that I gave to Juan with no drums, but everything else. um, his contribution to, like, come up with what he came up with and how it really affects the overall piece, I thought was huge. And then we had some back and forth where he gave me some feedback on the arrangement. Believe it or not, the piece was actually significantly longer, and there were some sections that he suggested we cut out, and some places where he suggested some things get added. So, that sort of his major contribution on the drums and percussion, and then the kind of feedback working on the arrangement is, those are part of the reason that he has a writing credit on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And there's some I think clapping in the middle section. Is that him?
Yeah, and there's like 7 or 8 tracks of him clapping. It's really cool. Yeah, yeah. I
Very
think
nice.
that, um, with electronic program drums, the tools that you can use today, and what you can do to mix them, it can be hard to tell sometimes what's acoustic, but
Yeah.
everything that Juan does on the album is acoustic. It's just amazing, including all those percussion tracks and all those claps. It's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be, yeah, you can use samples and you wouldn't be able to tell. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I I do like, if I'm gonna use personally, if I'm gonna use samples, I like to kind of obliterate them and make them sound like crazy. And
Yeah.
if I'm like, no, I really want the acoustic sound, and I'm gonna try to get someone to actually play it. And there's something about it. I think
Yeah.
there's always somewhere you can kind of tell if it's a machine or if it's a human being. So
Yeah.
um,
Definitely. Yeah.
that's great. Great to have Juan on this album. I mean, he's really, really, really great on that, and on Mark's album as well.
Yeah.
But I think on this one, you gave him a lot of curveballs that I was like, man, he knocked him out of the field.
Yeah.
So
Definitely. Yeah.
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 Um, eighth track is again is a small track. I have my usual question: guitar, touch guitar. I don't know if you can tell if those tracks usually use touch guitar only, or if you use a little bit of both, or
Yeah. You're right. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell. Like on the last one, time and adaptation, that long piece, there are 20 something tracks of U8 and guitar on there. All the bass is U8. All the really most of the album, the solos are U8. There's a few guitar solos where you can hear, like, faster picking. May have done one of those on U8 and the other one's a guitar. And then the sort of clean guitar sounds that aren't obviously a touch guitar are sometimes hard for me to tell. But
Yeah.
on track 8, I do know. I think that was U8 bass part in, and then U8 melody tracks that I doubled on guitar. So I was trying to find a sound that I liked that kind of combined those. And my original version of that melody, I had recorded in a way that I really didn't like the sound. I think it was like recorded too compressed to begin with, and actually spent a lot of time kind of re-recording it to find a sound that I liked, and ended up kind of doubling that between the two instruments. And then all of the soundscapey texture background stuff is U8 on that piece.
Yeah, for some reason, when it comes to soundscapes, I think the extended range of the Dutch guitar makes it natural. To use. You obviously get the guitar range, but you get the baritone as well, and you can go into the bass range if you want. But just having even just a baritone range makes it very flexible and a much bigger soundscape.
Totally agree. And I really hadn't thought about it until this conversation, but I exclusively use the U8 on all the soundscape stuff. I don't think I ever used guitar on that.
We'll go back to time and adaptation, the number 7, the big piece. You wanted to share a few things and see what's in there under the hood.
Sure. Okay. So this is, can you see that?
Yep.
This is another pre-mix project. So interesting thing. So it's sort of prepping the tracks to send off to Fabio, and particularly with the drums. Juan had given me some really nice mixes of the drums, but I'm sort of unwinding all of that into the raw drum tracks before sending off to Fabio, and he's sort of doing his own mix and interpretation of that. So you'll hear the drums sounding a little bit more raw there because they're sort of lost ones mix, and you'll get a little bit of that with the other tracks as well. But I thought I'd show you, maybe just to show you the difference between some of the smaller pieces that we looked at. This one has about 60 tracks.
Yeah, you keep scrolling.
Orange green here is Juan's percussion and drum tracks.
Wow.
And there's just a ton of I don't think there are any keyboard tracks. The other ones are all guitars and U8s around there. But I can show you a little bit of what the drums and percussion sound like on their own, or the hand clap section, and some of the sort of layers of the other stuff. If we go to this section, this is where a lot of the cool stuff is happening. If we can hear it. Give me 1 second. I got to reshare with the audio.
Oh yeah,
that's right. I missed that step. There we go. Oops. Let me give that one more try. Okay, you should see live.
Yeah.
Okay, and we should have the audio. Okay, so this is the middle section. Show you the drums and percussion. Just the percussion.
Oh, man.
You can see all the hand clap tracks. There's 6 or 7 of them. A lot of stuff going on just there. And if you add the drums, I'll throw in some bass. bass in here with drums. Sometimes I can't keep up with all these tracks, so it's
I know, right?
So this is an example of some layers of bass tracks here, and then it builds back up with some of the guitars. There's 3 different U8 basses here. There's a guitar. That's U8 chords, I think.
That's a U8.
Couple of guitar tracks on top of that too. And then here's the solo coming in. So you can hear that's pretty wet there too. And it's skipping on my computer. Yeah, so some stuff there. Yeah, I just love the drums and percussion on this one. It's kind of cool to see all that's there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on, and that's one of the things I really appreciate with the album is you go back and you kind of focus on different sections, and you're like, oh, there's all this extra stuff I didn't really, hear the first time around. But
I think it might be fun to do some remixes on this, because there's a lot of material to work with. That's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, if you it can be interesting. It's remixes are sometimes, I think if they're done right, in the sense that you're really looking to a different approach to the piece, it's really great. If it's just, a lot of times remixes are like, oh, I'm just going to put an electronic kind of beat on it, and it's like, okay. Yeah, I mean, it can still be really cool. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But, yeah. So, well, I'm glad you shared that. That was very, very interesting to see. Obviously, all the percussion stuff, but also in the guitar front. Myself being a touch guitarist, is kind of see how your mind works and how you kind of divide different parts for them to work together. So
great.
Yeah. So we had left off on the number 9, I think, track 9, Mercury.
Yeah.
That's one of the tracks where you have a war guitar. I think in the listening party on Sunday, you mentioned, or Saturday, I can't remember which day it was, you mentioned that you don't have that guitar anymore, right?
Yes, I had a War Phalanx model for a little less than 10 years, and this piece was an idea that came from back when I had that instrument. And actually, a few of the tracks, there's a guitar track and the War bass track that's in the A section, are from ideas that I recorded back then. I just wanted to use them on the piece, so I added a ton to it, but I did keep the kind of original War bass and layered in some U8 bass to double it in that section, and then the rest of the bass is U8 throughout. Yeah, so it's actually the only piece I have with any recording of that instrument, other than maybe some other ideas that I collected back then. So it's kind of neat to be able to use it.
So instead of redoing the track, you're like, okay, the bass track on the War guitar sounds great, I'm going to use that, and then you added your
exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I've never actually played a War guitar. Is it much different in, let's say, the tone? I know there's different tunings.
This is the model. I had a 12-string version of it that has a really large space. It's a very wide fretboard and a really large space between the 6 guitar strings and the 6 bass strings. So it's an instrument that forces you to play uncrossed, because the neck is too wide to play with a crossed technique.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized once I got it and started, really when I started working with Marcus and learning from him and trying his instrument, that style of playing really wasn't what I was looking for. Yeah, so it does have its own. It did have its own kind of unique sound on the bass. So yeah, again, it was kind of neat to be able to use it. But I added a lot of other bass components in this piece too.
All right. Um, we've got Primordial, which again is a soundscape, one of those little interludes. I gotta stop saying little because they're not little. Um, so how did that kind of come about? What are the parts that maybe came first?
Yeah, I have lots and lots of pieces like that that I just sort of improvise and record. And sometimes I'll go back and listen to them and find something that I like and that I want to use. This one, I think I recorded it somewhere during the time I was working on the album, but it was just an improv that I was recording one evening. And it had these kind of cool animal like sounds from some of the effects that I was using. So that sort of was the starting part of the piece, was that soundscape. And I think, like the collapsing cloud, I used the whole soundscape and just added things to it. The other stuff, there was an idea that I had to sort of have several tracks that have sort of maybe like an 8 measure phrase length, but they kind of overlap in 4 measures of it, so that as you add new things, they're still part of what was happening there, but it's blending in with new elements that are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that is going on throughout the piece. But then there are a couple of tracks that have different phrase lengths there, so that they kind of overlap with that in different ways. So started with the soundscape and then kind of layering in that idea. So you hear a lot of sort of touch guitar and guitar tracks, doing some rhythmic stuff there with that concept. And then there's like a brief melody that comes in a couple times before the piece. In the soundscape, it kind of unwinds and ends up with chaos. So I kind of did that with the other tracks that I added to it. So it has this neat effect. Like when I listen to it, I imagine like looking at like microscopic creatures in a microscope, and in the beginning of the piece it's out of focus, and then you're focusing in and seeing them, and then coming out of focus again, because it kind of starts and ends with chaos. But yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you improvise your soundscape, but then you go back and you hear things or you add things, and it really makes a real piece. Not that a soundscape is not a real piece, but you've got, like you said, little melodies and different things that start appearing. So that's really really nice. We've got the last couple of tracks. So the 11th track, I think Mark has a kind of a strange. There's something that's like um, he's he has you said U8 marimba bell parts or
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know. Maybe
yeah,
you can
yeah.
explain that.
This one started with a collaboration, and Mark had given me something that he had written that was like a bunch of, I think, mallet and marimba bells and glockenspiel parts. And and I think he's got a couple pieces on one of his album that have kind of some similarities to what he gave me. They're really cool, the way they sort of overlap in different phrase lengths, and it's actually kind of hard to come up with rhythmic things to go with them, because that it's hard to find the phrase length in that stuff. But I really liked it, and that was the starting where the idea for the song came from. And I added a couple sections to it, and then kind of realized, like, I kind of like these ideas, but they don't really go with the stuff that Mark gave me as is. So in the final version of the piece, some of those tracks that he gave me are sort of converted into drum tracks that are heavily affected and used in the intro and the end of the piece. And then there's some keyboard parts that he gave me in that starter idea that appear in the middle of the song. But what I did was some of those mallet and marimba and bell glockenspiel parts is I replayed them on 4, 5, 6 different touch guitar and guitar tracks. So there's a bunch of sort of layers of touch guitars playing those things. Mostly like they appear in towards the beginning of the song and again at the end, and it's somewhat brief. But there's kind of a lot of components that Mark gave me that are used throughout the song. But we didn't do it with this piece, but one idea I had after the direction this piece went in was it might be an interesting collaboration to do with somebody, where somebody gives you an idea and you do something along with it, and then you take away the original idea and give them, the thing that you came up with as a starter for them to add something and take that in a different direction and kind of exchange that idea back and forth and see where that goes. So this is like one step of that is what ended up happening with this piece.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, there's a fair amount of touch guitar parts. Are there any guitar parts in there? Do you?
Yes. Like all the songs, all the bass is U8. Most of the distorted solos are U8. I think there's some guitar solos in there. All the textures are U8. But again, like the cleanish guitar tracks, there's a kind of a blend of U8s and guitars. And some are a little hard to tell listening back what's what. So kind of like time and adaptation, there's a mix of a lot of guitar and U8 tracks in here, but probably more U8 than guitar in this piece.
Yeah, and it's all touch style. Do you do sometimes you pluck or finger style with the touch guitar, with the U8?
Definitely the bass parts in Solitude are all plucked or finger style, and Illumination as well. Most of the other pieces are tapped for bass parts.
Okay. Yeah, there's some things I can kind of tell it's more in the bass parts. In the guitar parts, I can't really, because sometimes you play guitar too, so I don't know if it's actually just the guitar sound I'm hearing or if it's you playing his fingers or anything on the touch guitar stuff. But it's always fun to geek out a little bit on that stuff.
Yeah.
So the last piece is obviously it closes out the album, and it's somewhat of a soundscape, but there's a pretty specific rhythm to it. And so I don't know if it was the same approach as the other one, or it was more of an actual written piece that you did, and it kind of just sounds by chance like a soundscape, or
the last one is pretty interesting. So there's a drum track in there that's actually one of the glitchy drum tracks that Mark gave me for Recoil. I grabbed a portion of that and looped it, and it's super heavily affected, but that's sort of that plus bass on top of it is kind of the rhythmic element, or U8, but in that piece. And that's, I think, how it started. I wanted that glitchy electronic drum feel to reappear somewhere, so it wasn't just in one piece that kind of stands out as being different from everything else. So this is where that comes back. There's some this song has no keyboards in it, so all of the kind of distorted, maybe keyboardy industrial kind of sounds are they're all U8 with lots of effects on it. So definitely very improvised. It started with a drum loop and then some bass along with it, and then kind of added layers to that. Probably the first idea after the bass was those sort of distorted notes that you hear going throughout.
Yeah, there's a lot of ear candy in that piece. and it's uh, um, it's a really nice piece to end the album.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a dark ending, but
Darkly
yeah,
forming.
I like how that ended up. Yeah.
It's darkly
That was
forming.
actually one
So
of the last pieces that I finished, and because it felt pretty different, I was a little uncertain about it up right up until I went to Berlin, and then Marcus and I talked, and I addressed a couple of things that I didn't like about it, and he liked it enough to include it. So I really like
oh, really?
how the album ends with that there.
Yeah, I would have never. I mean, it feels like it perfectly fits in there. That it's I don't. I would have never even imagined that it was maybe a black sheep or anything like that. So, so yeah, no, that's cool to know. And so that's all the tracks, all 12 tracks. Lots of information. I really appreciate you shared some of your sessions. Great. Well,
Great.
I think that's it. That was really a lot of great information. Very interesting. I'm gonna have to listen to the album again a few
Great.
times to hear everything that you mentioned. So thank you very much for taking the time, and um, I'm really hoping you get some good feedback and a little bit of a bigger audience that can appreciate this music.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, me too. It was really great talking to you. Thanks for
Right.
spending the time chatting.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks. See ya.